Good morning, boys and girls. Today we're going to be looking at rounding. Now, earlier this week we've looked at estimation and we made some estimates about how many gumballs were in the gumball. But today we're going to dig a little bit deeper about rounding and understanding about the different ways that we can round numbers and exactly how do we do that. Now, our goal, remember, in this is working towards learning more about estimation. And we know that our question right now is, why is estimation important and how and when can we use it? And that's the whole goal in this project. But before we get there, we need to kind of understand what rounding is. So the first thing that we've looked at is our little saying. Remember, if it's 5 or more, you gain. If it's 4 or less, you stay the same. And that's the only thing you need to remember when you're looking at rounding. Now we have 3 examples that we're going to work through together. The first one is we're looking to round to the nearest 10, and the number we're going to be looking at today is the number 56. We're going to be rounding 56 to the nearest 10. So to do that, I'm going to go to my number, and I need to underline the number in the tens place. And I know that 6 is in the ones and the 5 is in the tens place. So I'm going to underline that 5. Now I'm going to look to the digit to the right. And that digit is going to tell me what I need to do. Now I'm going to go back. Is it 5 or more? It's going to gain. If it's 4 or less, it's going to stay the same. I know that 6 is more than 5, which means that 5 is going to gain 1. By gaining 1, it's now going to turn into a 6. So that 5 is turning into a 6, and then everything after it to the right is going to turn into a 0. So we now have rounded the number 56 to 60. The next number we're going to look at is 4,520. And we, again, are going to be rounding this to the nearest 1,000. Remember, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to that thousands place, and I want to see everyone underlining it. This is so important when you're practicing your work so you don't get confused. So I'm underlining the thousands place because that's where it wants me to round to. And then I'm going to look to that digit to the right, which is going to be the 5, and that 5 is in the hundreds place. I'm going to go up, and I can say it in my head, but I'm going to read it out loud so I know you're with me. If it's 5 or more, you gain. If it's 4 or less, you stay the same. So that 5 is 5 or more, which means that 4 now, I know, is going to gain 1. And 4 plus 1 is 5, so it's going to be a 5. And then everything to the right turns to a 0. So that 5 is turning to a 0. The 2 is going to turn to a 0. And the 0 is going to stay a 0. So we now have just rounded the number 4,520 to the nearest 1,000. And our new number is 5,000. I'm going to give you a second to look at this number down here. We're looking at the number 23,092. And it is asking us to round to the nearest 10,000. I want you to ask yourself, what number, what digit is in the 10,000s place? What number am I going to underline? I'm going to go to my number. I'm going to underline the digit in the 10,000s place, and that's going to be the 2. Oops. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look to that digit right next door in the thousands place, which happens to be a 3. And then I'm going to find out. I got to think about, what am I going to do? Is that 3 5 or more? No. So I know I'm not going to gain. Is it 4 or less? Yes. 3 is less than 4, so it's going to stay the same. So I'm going to go back to my 2 that we are looking at because we're rounding to the nearest 10,000. I'm going to take that 2, and it is going to stay the same. So 2 stays the same. And just like before, everything else turns to a 0. So that 3 turns to a 0. The 0 in the hundreds place stays the same. The 9 in the tens place stays the same. And the 2 in the ones place turns to a 0. So now I have my number 20,000. So 23,092 rounded to the nearest 10,000 is 20,000. Thank you so much for listening, boys and girls.